Hello my bookish friends out there in booktube land, and welcome to this episode of Tristan and the Classics. In this episode I'm going to share with you something I've been asked for a lot, and it is 10 classic books which I don't particularly like. And believe me, when you hear them, especially if you've been following my channel for any time, there's some shockers in here. So much so that I reckon every single book, with the exception of one, will have a fan base of some kind, but it's just not my cup of tea. However, I appreciate why they're classics. So, having said all of that, grab yourself a coffee, sit down, and let's have a little giggle at the books that I don't like. So let's have a look at the first one. The first one is, the great works of H.G. Wells. Now, I'm not picking all of them, although I'm not a fan of H.G. Wells overall. War of the Worlds is all right. And you'll know that one, and then of course, you know, there's The Invisible Man. But the book, the classic I don't like is The Time Machine. Oh, I found it so sluggish. Now I know and understand its place in the classic, canon, because, I think it was the first book, was it? I think they've said it's the first book that discussed time travel. Although Connecticut and King Arthur's Court, that sort of time travel, isn't it? But not deliberate scientific. H.G. Wells has a guy called the Time Traveller. He goes into the future to the year 801,000 AD, and he finds a society there which is sort of the humans have split, like evolved in two different directions. You've got the Eloi, who live above ground, and the Morlocks, who live below ground. The Eloi have a pleasant life, they're calm, everything's peaceful. They're completely lackadaisical. They've got no curiosity, no intellectual needs, because they don't need to. They've got no struggle. But they're afraid of the dark, because in the dark, some of them go missing every night. And then he finds out why that is, and it's linked to the Morlocks, who live underground down the wells, and they don't like the lights, but they can come out at night, of course. Now, I don't want to do spoilers for this, because I'm not saying don't read it. If you like sci-fi, you may love this, but H.G. Wells, for me, his writing is so sludgy. I'm like, get on with it. And I read books which are slow-paced. I don't mind slow-paced at all. But H.G. Wells just seems to be curdled words. And especially The Time Machine. What I particularly dislike about The Time Machine is there's a very wishy-washy character in it, like a complete drip. The girl that he falls in love with. And she's just got nothing about her. He covers a lot of ground. And then there's like anachronisms in there. For instance, they see this place called the Palace of Green Porcelain in the distance. And he realizes that it's an old metropolis, and they go up to it, and it's a museum. Now, when this museum collapsed, I have no idea. I can't remember. But it would have been a long time ago. But do you know what he finds in there which helps him go to deal with the Morlocks underground? A box of matches. 801,000 AD. We're nearly 1 million years into the future. A box of matches. Now, okay, friction may last that long into the future. Obviously, friction will, but using matches to start fires, that's one thing. But how long had that place been crumbled down? Because they've abandoned the megacities of yesteryear a long time ago. Wood lice would have got to it. Mold would have got to it. Matches would not be there. But it's very convenient for the plot. Now, I know I'm ranting about this tiny little detail, but it really, really bugged me. And I didn't like it at all. However, there's a whole H.G. Wells fan club. Some people love The Time Traveller, The Time Machine. I'm sure for some people, but it's their favourite book. I must be honest, I'm not a science fiction fan. I do like dystopia. I do like sort of political science fiction. But this, I suppose it was good in its day. Even H.G. Wells said it was a bit amateurish, but it was his first book, written in 1895. So he says he's not disappointed he wrote it, but the older H.G. Wells could see quite big problems with it. I saw them straight away. So that was number one. War of the Worlds, not War of the Worlds, Time Traveller by H.G. Wells. Second book up is Alexander Dumas' The Black Tulip. Now, what a great title and a great picture. Look at that picture. Absolutely wonderful. So, just the title, The Black Tulip, I thought, ooh, I like Dumas, the Lion of French literature, and let's have a look at this. And it started off really well. It's set in Amsterdam during Tulip Mania, which was a real thing in, was it the 17th century or the 18th century? One of the two. Now, there was a race on amongst tulip growers to actually make a black tulip. And that's what the story follows. The main character is Cornelius Van Berle, I think his name is. And he goes to the countryside at a very fraught time politically. And he just works on growing tulips. And he slowly works out how to make a black one. Now, nearby, his neighbor is also a tulip grower. And this neighbor is very jealous of Cornelius because Cornelius has a lot of money that he can invest into it. And this other tulip grower has been doing it longer. And that jealousy gets Cornelius in trouble. In fact, it gets him arrested. So far, so good. That takes up about the first half of the book. And the detail of him explaining Cornelius developing his tulips and setting up his greenhouses and the way he stores bulbs and seeds. And it is really, really good. It makes you want to go out and plant stuff in your garden. However, the second half of the book, I do not know what happened. Dumas gets the guy in prison and then is like, right, let's make an escape. And he contrives the most set-piece story to finish the book. This book proves that some classics are called classics because the author has written classics, but that does not a classic book make, and this is proof of it, the best example. Because the second half is like today's genre fiction. He's used his name knowing full well he could make money off his name. And he's just put these, XYZ sort of formulaic stitching together at the end of the book to get a release of Cornelius and everything comes up roses. Or tulips, perhaps. And that's about it. There's some good descriptive bits in the end of to traveling through the streets, but it's literally like best-selling fiction today. There is a formula to it, and his name sold it, and it had so much promise at the beginning with an absolute awful letdown in the second half. And I'm sorry, Mr. Dumas, you're a greater writer than me, but this, I could see what you were doing. I actually studied up on it afterwards and found out he was in pecuniary straits. So he is needing some money, and he just whacked out a novel. He had a good idea and probably had to rush for the cash. So there you go, second one, Alexander Dumas' The Black Tulip. This is the one I don't think anyone is a fan of. So this is the one no one's going to be upset by. The third classic book, which I don't particularly like and am underwhelmed by, is ready for an audible gasp for any of those who have watched me for any amount of time. Charles Dickens' Hard Times. I know, right? I love Charles Dickens, but Hard Times was a hard time to get through. And my wife sort of liked it, but she hasn't read as much Dickens as me. And even if I hadn't read much Dickens, I don't think this would have got me. So Hard Times is set in the fictional town of Coketown, which is supposedly, well, it's representative of the northern coal towns in Dickens' day, because he was a social writer, for social change. Now, our main antagonist is Mr. Gradgrind. He's the headmaster of a school in Coketown. And then you also have the hard-nosed mill owner, Mr. Bounderby. I mean, absolutely great Dickensian names. And Bounderby has a son called Tom. And then there's a weaver who's important in it. And a guy called Weaver who's important in it. And then there's the absolutely adorable Sissy Jupe. She comes from a circus, and they try to educate her in the school. Now, the whole thing takes on the idea of utilitarianism. At the beginning, it starts off so well. It's really Dickensianly funny, where Sissy, they're trying to teach her at school how to describe a horse. And it's so unlike a horse. It's like a ruminating quadruped it's so scientific that it loses all of its joy. And that's what Dickens is attacking, this measuring of all society. He uses the expression hands for workers in a factory, showing that they have no value as people. It's a very bleak landscape, got no problem with that. Dickens does that all the time. But the story just, for me, is very, very lacking. It had a huge amount of potential. And there's a little bit of mystery, but I don't feel it's that well pulled off. And yet, again, another book that had a significant impact. It's another book which, amongst Dickens lovers, plenty of them rate it as his best. I just can't get on with it. I prefer it when he's in London, especially, because he does London so well. But I found the story just that bit thin. Now, the worst thing about this Dickens book is its size. A lot of people want to go into Dickens, and one of the ways you judge a book when you're starting is its size. And most of Dickens' works are like big thumpers. So there's a few that are not. For instance, Tale of Two Cities, Hard Times, Great Expectations, a bit bigger than both of them, but they're the smaller books. You may pick this one up thinking, I'll try Dickens. If you do, I would say this is the one that could put you off the most. But I could be wrong. Other people love it, like I say. What this video is not saying is don't read them. I'm just sharing with you because I've had so many people ask, you're so positive about the classic books and everything, are there any that you don't particularly enjoy? Yes, that's what I'm doing here. But I must say, just a little caveat, not enjoying a book doesn't mean to say I can't appreciate a book. As we talk about in my Patreon community, if you want to get exclusive content and join a book reading every month, links down below. The fourth classic book that I'm not particularly fond of is, okay, get ready for some people to throw the laptops at the wall in anger here. It's Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Oh, do you know, I understand and appreciate why some people love this book. It is fantastic. Well, it is fantastical, and it's brilliant as an adventure. I just couldn't get on with it so well. I'm not the biggest Jules Verne fan. You know, I've read some, you know, I don't mind Around the World in 80 Days, but I think there's better. I'm sure it probably sounds better in French. But 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, you've got a story. You've probably heard of Captain Nemo. Well, Captain Nemo comes from this because he is a guy that's fled the civilization of the landbound, and he's built a submarine. Now, at the beginning, you hear about this narwhal, this weird creature that's been spotted at sea, that's been causing damage to boats. And so our main character, whose name slips my mind now because it's been so long, he goes out to sea with another ship to find this thing, and the creature attacks the ship. And him and his two friends flung overboard. And then they end up on top of the creature. And lo and behold, it's a submarine. It's not a creature at all. And they spend the whole night up there in the ocean. And then the next day, I think it is, they're dragged inside. And they meet Captain Nemo, who's a bit crackers. And he has a past. I'm not going to spoil this because some of you will love this. But if you like sci-fi, you like adventure, I actually would probably recommend it. But I can't get on with it. Captain Nemo has a grudge against a nation that attacked his people, killed his family. And they take adventures under the sea. You know, they go to the bottom of the sea. There's a little bit far-fetched the way they get out and walk around. I wasn't enamored of that. Again, back in its day, maybe, but today I just can't follow it. And there's visits to the lost world of Atlantis, and they see wrecks from the battle of, where was that? Vigo Bay, was it? So they do lots of adventurous things, but I find it a little bit loosely stitched. I do appreciate the ending, how that works out, because you've got a sort of Byronic hero in Captain Nemo. You know, he's a sort of bad guy who, well, he does some certain stuff that shocks our main character, but nonetheless, he's drawn to him. And there is a crazy magnetism about Captain Ahab as you go through the book. So I thoroughly appreciate it. I just don't like it that much. You know, so there it is. Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Do you like it? Let me know about any of these books, which ones you actually like. You are allowed to like them. You know, no one has a complete agreement with other people in what they read. And of course, millions love this book. I just don't. So the fifth book on our list, excuse me, my American cousins, is Last of the Mohicans by James Fenimore Cooper. I really struggled with this book. I almost became last of the readers. Now, Fenimore Cooper, as with Nathaniel Hawthorne, one of the things they were doing in literature, especially in American literature, was trying to create a history for the American people. A rich backdrop, an identity. And it has lasted. And I've not read anything else by Fenimore Cooper because this one I disliked so much I couldn't read any more of him. His style of writing is overly ornate for me. I feel he tries too hard to be accepted maybe by the British critics, who didn't always like American writing. And yeah, there was the whole thing about, the colonials. Wouldn't forgive them for breaking free. But he does try very hard. And this book packs in way too much. I think he got excited about how many adventures you could have in the vast American wilderness. And he just stuffs it full. So the story is set in the 1750s, the French-British War up there in North America. And the siege of Fort William Henry, I think it was. Now, we've got the Munro sisters who are sort of central to this book. Cora, and can't remember the other one's name. The younger ones slipped my mind. Anyway, they're being led out to some safer spot because the French are about. And they're led out by this young lieutenant who the young girl likes. Anyway, they head into the woods, which obviously they've got this secret track. They've got this guy. They get lost. And that's dreadful. So that's so far so good in some respects, although by this point the writing hasn't caught me. They end up meeting Hawkeye. You've probably heard that from, from literature. Hawkeye he's a British person who's adopted the ways of the Native Americans, and his two friends, Chingachgook and Uncas. I actually like those two great characters. And he leads them through the wilderness, dodging not only the French, but particularly Magua, who I believe is a Huron Indian and, has got a bit of a fearsome reputation and wants to kill people, kill the British especially. But then the way he tries to hide them and the adventures they go on and the fighting and the escape by canoe and a man who cannot stop singing hymns in the middle of the jungle at the top of his voice. I have no idea. I mean, I think Fenimore Cooper thought that must be funny, but it just wasn't. And so on it goes. And it comes to this one point, if you've read it, you'll know what I'm talking about now. You have never seen a scene with a bear like this one. Bear, rawr. Craziest scene. And then the most surprising, dealing with one of the main characters. It's shocking. I'm trying not to give anything away. That's the one bit that's worth reading it for, just to see the most abysmal dealing with one of the main characters. If you want to get the best summary of this novel, in under 5 minutes, I have a link below to a video I did a long time ago where I do a bit of a mock reenactment of this book. It's called The Last of the Mohicans under 5 minutes or something. I'll put the link. Please go and watch it. And if you like it and want more of those kind of videos, tell me and I'll do more of them. But I've only got one or two. But that one, if you want to see what it's about, go and watch it. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek, humorous, if it's your cup of tea. So that was the fifth one. James Fenimore Cooper's Last of the Mohicans, I thought was pants. But, of course, it's got a great following. Some people love this book. I don't know why, but that just goes to show taste, doesn't it? We all like certain things. So, Last of the Mohicans, James Fenimore Cooper. So we're into the last 5 now. We're on book 6, and believe me, there are some big ones coming which will surprise you. Now, this one is the favourite book of many a reader, many a good reader, readers whose taste you can trust, but this book just did not sit well with me. This says The Essential Kafka. It's particularly Kafka's trial. Oh my days. People rave about Kafka's trial. I will say that I actually like the writing. So if it was purely on style, or to a degree, I could go with that. I can also understand and appreciate. Remember, enjoying a book is not necessarily the only thing. I read books also to appreciate them. I try and understand the value of them, get something out of them. But this one so underwhelmed me and drove me up the wall. If you've read The Trial, it's a bit of a Marmite one. You either love it or you hate it. You've got the guy Franz K. in this, which of course is himself, Franz Kafka. It's not autobiographical. Now, Franz K., at the beginning of the book, he's in his apartment I think he's in Germany, and he has the police visit where they arrest him and because he's committed some crime. Now, they don't tell him what the crime is, and he hasn't committed a crime. And then they don't take him to prison. They just say, well, your trial will come up. But they don't tell him when. So he's sort of thrown into this very topsy-turvy quicksand world where nothing is stable because he's forever got this looming trial hanging over him, hence the title, The Trial. And so he sets off trying to find out what he's been accused of, to settle the mistake, and everything becomes nightmarish or weird. It becomes psychedelic because he goes into all sorts of... The courtroom, for instance, isn't at a court. It's while he's in like some tenement building on the 4th floor, he wanders into this basic room where the people, and it happens to be a court. There's a crazy ending in here as well, like crazy. There's all these weird things going on, popping down to someone's house, down an alleyway and talking to them. And the conversations don't make sense in a lot of way. And of course, we get the phrase Kafka-esque, which is that delirious, not so much nightmarish, but delirium world where things don't add together. It's like surrealism in paper. Now, some love it because they say it anticipated the rise in bureaucratic tyranny where no one can find their way through all the corridors of bureaucracy when anything needs to be done with government. Actually, in that respect, yeah, really good. It is bewildering. But one thing I've been told about this book is when Kafka read it to his friends, he laughed all the time. Like every page, he thought it was hilarious. Now, maybe in its original language, which was it that Czech? Or did he write it in German? I don't know. Maybe it does sound funny in that. It didn't really read that funny in English. Maybe because I wasn't prepared for it. I wasn't looking for the jokes. But you're supposed to read it sort of tongue-in-cheek. However, it is so delirious to me. It is so nonsensical. It wraps up for me in such a poor way that I don't like it. And I know I'm not the only one. Loads of people can't stand The Trial. And it's nearly always the first one that people read of Kafka's, which is not probably the best. If you're going to read Kafka first, read Metamorphosis. That's much better. And then there's The Castle as well. But yes, other people, this is their favourite book, favourite of all time. I appreciate it. I don't get all the nuances in here, but then that's just me. We've all got our different experiences, tastes, what we're drawn to, and this one is definitely on the 10 books I just can't be bothered about. Are you ready to be scandalized? Because the next book, I hope it is going to horrify you that it's on my list. And I hope it doesn't cause you to all storm out on me. Remember, I appreciate this book. I know why others like it. It's just one book that I personally just couldn't get on with. And it is, I feel bad saying this, Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. Now, I know some of you have just spat your tea out, or you're like, no, never. I love Jane Austen. And I could easily do a book review on this book in depth, talking about all of its merits, the things that I appreciate about it, the angle that she goes at, which I find really pleasing, and yet still, I don't particularly like this book. Of all of Jane Austen, I've never done a ranking Jane Austen's books video. Lots of others have, I haven't. Right, but I'll give something away. If I ranked Jane Austen's books, this one comes bottom. I believe this was the first one she wrote, and it follows the two girls, doesn't it? Marianne and Eleanor, who, they lose their fortune, the family fortune, and they and their mother move into this little cottage. And it's the way they each go about trying to get respectability. Marianne is a romantic. If you've seen the film with Emma Thompson and Kate Winslet in, Kate Winslet plays Marianne. And she's a romantic, and her and her mother have high sensibility. It's something that Jane Austen is mocking, but I have to leave that to another. It's a historic feature which I'll have to leave to another video. If you want me to do a video on Sense and Sensibility, I'll be more than happy. But Marianne just really annoys me. She gets my goat. There's certain aspects of the story as well, which I don't feel connect right. And that scene in London with Marianne and Willoughby, I can see it as high drama, but at the same time, oh man, you know when you just want to shake somebody? That's what I felt. Eleanor, I thought was a wonderful character. She is great. But even, so there's nothing wrong with the character. Then there's Willoughby, of course, and then there's the Colonel, of course. And I don't think the Colonel's as well drawn as Alan Rickman plays him in the film. But the characters are good. The ideas are good. The petty backstabbing of, you know, high society, London society, is actually quite good. But the book just leaves me cold. Because I think of Pride and Prejudice. There's a full-bodied flavour to Pride and Prejudice. Then if you were to take Emma or Mansfield Park, there's a depth of maturity about those two books. And Northanger Abbey is light and pleasing and funny. You know, I really enjoyed that. Persuasion, a different book altogether, a very quiet book. This book has, you can see she's learning her craft here. And it's just, Marian in particular does my head in. And it ruined the book for me. But there's a certain thinness of connection, loose stitching, you know, trailing fragments of that could unwind the whole tapestry. And that's why I'm not a fan of Sense and Sensibility. So it left me underwhelmed. And I've read it more than once. And again, I don't want to say much more because I'm waffling. But nonetheless, that's one book that left me totally underwhelmed. And is, when you've asked me which books do I not particularly like, which are classics, this is a great classic which just isn't my thing. And yet I love Jane Austen. Okay, we're down to the last three and they are all biggies, but the last one, believe me, is going to rock you. But this one, I feel so bad about it because so many people love it. It was written in 1920. It won this author the Pulitzer Prize. In fact, it was the first woman ever to win that accolade, and it is The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. This book has one of the most moving endings I've read. I absolutely loved it. And it has one of the best bits of foreshadowing I have ever read. But the whole rest of the book just didn't sit well with me. Like, it's just, I got bored. Now, what Wharton does really well in this, she captures the manners of society in New York, which was very Edwardian as well, and hadn't quite relaxed as much as Britain had started to. And the story, you've got Newland Archer, I think his name is. Is he a lawyer or something? He's an eligible bachelor. He's the heir to a great fortune. And he is engaged to marry, what's her name? Welland. May Welland. This pretty, innocent, charming, you know, properly brought up girl. And the book starts quite near, at the beginning, it starts with an opera. They go to an opera where everyone goes to see and be seen. She really gets that feel, and the atmosphere of the opera I thoroughly enjoyed. But Newland ends up meeting May's cousin, the voluptuous, the sultry, the feline, the alluring Ellen Olenski. And she has scandalously separated from her husband over in Europe, who's an absolute brute. I think he's a baron or something, but she's come back to America, and, you know, she's obviously got to weather the storms of popular opinion. But she is, I must admit, she's a very alluring character and very well drawn. And Newland is drawn towards her, but of course he's affianced to May, and the story goes forth from there. The story itself is quite good, but I don't like the way Edith Wharton executed it. I thought, again, it was, some parts of it felt like purple prose to me. Some parts of it felt forced, too heavy-handed in places, even though it's a thin book. But like I say, what an ending. For those of you who have read it, you may remember the line, "It is more real to me down here than it will be up there." And what happens, that is just sublime, right? This sounds strange that I'm raving about the ending, but there's characters in here which I think they're two-dimensional. They've got potential to be bigger characters. I can see that Edith Wharton sees them more vividly in her head, but yeah, I don't feel it's as full. I think this book, to have worked, should have been at least double the size. Because although I like a good short book, there was plenty that needed to be round out. I felt the backdrop, which started so well, became cardboard. It was very much, you can't walk past those walls. Whereas a really good book, the backdrop, you know it's fake. You're never going to go to that cottage in the distance, but you believe you can. In this, you know, you have the painted streets of New York and the occasional set room, which you can actually go into. But I understand why a lot of people like this. I appreciate it. I appreciate it very much. But it's just one of the classics that I didn't jibe with, you know? So there you go, The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. Whether you're an avid reader or you've been watching my channel for some time, this one will surprise you. It's one of the Sherlock Holmes books that I don't get on with. Now, if you've watched my videos, I rave about Sherlock Holmes. I think Arthur Conan Doyle was an absolute genius. This detective is the best of all detectives. I recently had someone say that it's contrived. It's not contrived. It's because the details which he works out, they seem to be as if they've been set up, but they're not like clues which he's picked up. It's just beautiful observation of the most mundane things which we overlook that Sherlock never does. And I believe, as evidence of how believable Sherlock is, Arthur Conan Doyle himself was asked to help someone who had a son who was wrongly convicted, and he actually got them off using the deductive skills that he puts into Sherlock. So, the best detective in my opinion. However, there is one of the Sherlock Holmes mysteries which is really highly rated, and I just don't like it. I just was thoroughly underwhelmed by it. Now, before I say it, there are two stories or cases of Sherlock Holmes. I believe it's The Lion's Mane and The Blanched Soldier. They are actually written from the perspective of Sherlock himself. Instead of Dr. Watson writing, Sherlock tells the story. Those two are disastrous. And it's a case study in picking the right narrator. But they're not the ones I'm talking about because they're not famous at all. The one I'm talking about is none other than The Hound of the Baskervilles. You know, this is the one of all of the Sherlock books which has been made most into movies. The Hound of the Baskervilles. It's got the detective work, but it's also got a very great degree of mystery. And I don't mean mystery in how was a crime committed, but there's a touch of the supernatural perhaps about it, because you've got this crazy beast that's out there on the moors that savages people and kills people, and it's got fiery eyes and glowing teeth and raw. And, you know, I can imagine for the Victorian world, it was great. You know, there's a lot of science fiction developing around this time. You're seeing the possibilities, sensationalism as well. And Conan Doyle puts that sort of sensationalist spin into a Sherlock story and actually works it out in a naturalistic way. So without any appeal to the occult, it's just people are scared of something and Sherlock unmasks what it is. However, to me, it is the most unrealistic of things. Although he works out what this beast is, when you find out, you're like, really? Like, someone would do that? No, they wouldn't. And there's so many problems with the beast itself that would have prevented it appearing the way it's described in the book, that I was thoroughly disappointed. It actually infuriated me when I read it, because I'd been reading all the others and I thought they were so wonderful, and then I got to Hound of the Baskervilles, which I knew to be like really highly rated, and that was the one I thought, you're kidding, that's nonsense. There's so many areas that could have gone wrong. That was contrived to me. I understand maybe what he was doing, following the feelings of the time, using his most famous detective and trying to move it in a different direction from just the pure detection and crimes, because of course Doyle notoriously didn't like Sherlock Holmes. That's why he killed him, but on popular demand, had to resurrect him. But yes, Hound of the Baskervilles, I actually think, other than The Lion's Mane and The Blanched Soldier, which is narrated by Sherlock himself, I think Hound of the Baskervilles is the worst Sherlock Holmes book out there. And it's the one I would recommend everyone. If you're getting into Sherlock, don't read Hound of the Baskervilles first. Read Study in Scarlet, or Scandal in Bohemia, or Sign of the Four. Those three are just blinking marvellous. So there you go. That's the classic that's got on my 10 classics I don't particularly enjoy. Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle. We're down to the 10th classic now, a great classic which I don't particularly enjoy. In fact, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's hogwash, but you know, this, if you watched my channel for some time, you would have been shocked to see Charles Dickens come up on this list. Scandalised to see Jane Austen and Arthur Conan Doyle come on this list. But this one, if you know me, get ready to pass out or swoon. Get your smelling salts ready, because it's none other than a play by Shakespeare himself, who you know I adore. This play was his first tragedy, and it is Titus Andronicus. I just do not like this play at all. I mean, if there's evidence that even a genius can produce absolute plum duff, this is it. And I know loads of people like Titus Andronicus, so remember, I'm not trying to be over the top dramatic, it's just I don't like it. Now, Titus Andronicus is a historical tragedy, and Shakespeare wrote it very specifically for the punters. You know, it was all about bums on seats, wasn't it? Getting people into the theatre to watch your stuff. And of course, Christopher Marlowe is the great one at the time with his works. And you have what the Elizabethans called the revenge plays, which is pretty self-explanatory what they're about. There's revenge, and there's violence, and there's bloodletting, and there's abysmal treating of other people. And the Elizabethans lapped it up. And Shakespeare got in on the act with Titus Andronicus. Titus Andronicus, our main character, he is a general of Rome. He comes back to Rome after a 10-year campaign against the Goths up in Germania. And he brings back with him the Queen of the Goths, Tamora, who he gives to the new Caesar, Saturninus. And Saturninus marries her, which that wasn't what Titus expected. And of course, now that she is empress, she wants to get revenge on Titus Andronicus and all who are related to him, his son, his mother, all the family, friends. And so it begins the bloodletting. And some of it is gratuitous, it is violent, obnoxious in places. Now, it's not that all of it was just made up, like James Fenimore Cooper just stuffing loads of things in for the sake of it. Shakespeare did read Seneca and Ovid and some other classical works. What's it? Thyestes, I think, was the piece he picked this from. Tereus and Philomela. He gets some of the account from that. The feast account. I'm not going to explain it because you might want to read it, because remember, I may not like it, but lots of people like Titus Andronicus. However, I think it's just dull. It's, you know, it's all flash and bang and trying to shock, and I don't think it's good. The turns of phrases that he uses, I don't think are particularly great. There's some, because he's always got an ear for rhythm, Shakespeare, but the whole story just, I thought, was a total letdown. And you've got a bad guy there, Aaron the Moor, who is the side lover of the Queen Tamora. And yet, even though he's supposedly this terrible, fearsome bad guy, it's just so overblown that it fails. And yet, remember, Shakespeare did write for popular entertainment as well. It's just in a lot of his tragedies, like Othello the Moor, he weaves in a lot of his own thinking and understanding and observations beneath a very good plot. Whereas Titus Andronicus, to me, is just a good plot. Even then it's overblown, and I'm not one for that. And so I did not like Titus Andronicus at all. I thought maybe it's because I've only read it once, but I've been back to it. Still thought it was absolutely, wow. I mean, I wouldn't dream of saying that, you know, the Bard wrote hogwash. But if he did, this is the closest thing that he ever came to hogwash. And interestingly, through history as well, you know, Ben Jonson, who wrote some great things on the preface to Shakespeare's plays and appreciated him, he couldn't stand this book, this play. Lots of later writers would pick out Titus Andronicus as a bit of like the ugly duckling in the pack because it just doesn't match up. When you think of others like Julius Caesar, Coriolanus, Mark Antony, you know, just to pick some Roman ones, so much better. And then the other tragedies, Hamlet, Othello, King Lear is another one, Macbeth, so good. The language, the imagery, Titus Andronicus, and yet people lapped it up in its day because there will always be popular culture. I think that's one of the reasons it doesn't shine out anymore, is because it doesn't have what so many of the others have. Some people say the worst play by Shakespeare is King John. I personally enjoyed King John, but Titus Andronicus, no thank you. If I didn't know that it was written by Shakespeare, I would have objected to someone saying it was written by Shakespeare because it's that different from all the other plays. Anyway, I've gone on long enough about that, but there you go. My last one, I told you would be a surprise. It is none other than Titus Andronicus, a play by the greatest playwright ever, Shakespeare. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that video on the 10 classics that are well known, but I personally am underwhelmed by. I gave it as a bit of an insight into me because so many people have asked, are there any classics you don't like? And I thought it's a valuable point to make that just because books are classics doesn't mean to say you have to enjoy them. I can read all of those and appreciate them for what they're trying to do. Some I really don't think are that much good at all. So like the Time Machine and Last of the Mohicans, I really don't like them at all. But overall, I can understand what's going on. And I wanted to share it because if there are certain classics I've talked about and you think, oh, I don't like that, is there something wrong with me in my reading? No. No one absolutely agrees on all the classics. If it was left to certain people, certain classics which are popular just wouldn't be around at all. It's because there's a diverse experience in life. We all have different backgrounds. And so that informs our enjoyment of something. However, what I do encourage, and I will do a video about this in the future, is understanding the difference between enjoying a book and valuing a book. There are books I rate more highly that I don't like personally than books that I do like. And yet I'll value them much higher than the books I like because I appreciate what they're trying to do. It's a different way of reading, and maybe I'll do a video of that in the future. Anyway, there are my 10 books. Tell me which ones do you love on this list? Tell me why, and tell me which ones surprised you the most to see me put on in this 10 books that I'm thoroughly underwhelmed by. Until the next time, please subscribe. That will help me no end. And until the next time, I wish you joy in whatever you read.